have given their lives. Praises to thee, husbands and wives, all thy children shall reap what you've sown. This continent is a home. My brothers and sisters, stand up and sing. Eduardo Montani is not gone. Frelimo, your eternal flame has shown us the light of dawn. Mozambique, a luta continua, continua. In Zimbabwe.
Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
2100 hours it is on this Thursday edition of Africa World Hour. Welcome to it. I am Tsepiso Makwetla. Thanks for joining us as we bring you 60 minutes of the very latest news from the heart of Africa to all corners of the globe. One planet, countless stories as we bring you the voices, the news and the perspectives that matter. And your perspective matters. We'd like to hear from you what your thoughts are on some of the stories that we're covering and, of course, where you listen from. What are the conversations that are dominating the public platforms where you are? What is driving the decisions that you're making? All that coming up in the next 60 minutes. We'd like to hear from you. +27 063 406 9126 if you'd like to send us your voice notes or your thoughts on that. Let's go straight to our top stories this hour. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has confirmed that he has received a letter from US President Donald Trump informing him about the decision to impose a 30% tariffs on South African products and goods exported to the United States. The tariff hikes are expected to come into effect next month. The president revealed this during the tabling of the budget vote of the presidency yesterday in Parliament. Ramaphosa has conceded that the US decision is going to significantly impact South Africa's economy in exported products. He says the impact is already being felt by some of the companies with their export volumes starting to decline.
Last week, we received notification in a letter from President Trump to myself that exports from South Africa to the United States will attract tariffs of up to 30% from the 1st of August 2025. This could have a substantial impact on the products that we export to the United States. We have already seen how just the mere news of the intention to impose tariffs has dampened the ability of a number of exporters from our country to the United States, and we've seen how some companies have had their exports declining by up to 80%.
To Central Africa now, where there are claims of human rights crises in the Republic of Congo. It comes after Lassie Mbweti, a Congolese political figure, historian and author, was brutally assaulted alongside with his wife. An activist and member of Amnesty International, Jurol Lumba, says Mbweti has been released by the government after pressure.
So right now he is in an Eden place. So we are actually doing everything in order to have him evacuated outside of Congo Brazzaville. Because despite the fact that he has been released, the Minister of Communication never actually, while he addressed this issue, he never showed any form of empathy. Because he's supposed to represent the entire nation and every citizen. Until now, they haven't taken any action. They haven't approached his wife. They haven't launched any investigation in order to find out what really happened. And that's simply because they know that they are behind what happened. And that's the sad truth.
In other news, the head of the AU Peace and Security, Ambassador Bankole Adeoye, has called for unity within Africa's various national, legislative and continental bodies. This after Bankole raised concerns about the levels of conflict on the continent. He was speaking at a joint consultative meeting between the Peace and Security Council of the African Union and the Pan-African Parliament in Johannesburg, South Africa, held under the theme Enhancing Institutional Synergy and Collaboration for Sustainable Peace and Security in Africa. The meeting seeks to strengthen the two institutions.
Teaches us that unity is strength. The unity between our organs in the AU, unity between the Pan-African Parliament and the Council will show that history can make us defeat our present challenge.
I do apologize for the poor quality of that sound. Malawi's Ministry of Justice has filed papers before the High Court in Lilongwe, opposing a review application launched by a self-proclaimed prophet, Shepherd Bushiri, and his wife Mary, against their extradition to South Africa. The couple is challenging a ruling by the chief resident magistrate in Lilongwe in March this year that ordered that they be surrendered to South Africa. Our correspondent in Malawi, George Mango, details the reasons that Bushiri's give for not wanting to be extradited to South Africa.
For the Bushiris, through their lawyer Wapona Kita, assenting to the fact that they feel that the security of their client, the Bushiris, will not be safe, and they also want that the witnesses that have, pointed fingers at the Bushiris, that they committed those crimes, they have to avail themselves in the court of law here in Malawi for security reasons. And they don't want it to be virtually conducted.
And a state of emergency has been declared in parts of Pakistan's most populated province of Punjab because of torrential monsoon rains. More than 60 deaths have been reported so far, especially over the past 24 hours. The BBC's Azadeh Mushiri has more.
The monsoon's heavy rainfall has submerged neighbourhoods, carried away cars and collapsed roofs. Dozens have been killed in some of Pakistan's largest cities, such as Lahore and Faisalabad. Some people have been told to evacuate their homes. Several flights have been cancelled and motorways closed. Pakistan's farmers depend on monsoons to replenish water supplies, but they carry great risk. People here still remember the monsoon from 3 years ago when more than 1,000 people were killed.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
SABC Sport brings you Chasing the Sun, a powerful 5-part documentary series about the Springboks, telling their rousing tale of the path to redemption and ultimate World Cup glory in 2019. Starting 13 July at 7:30 p.m. on SABC2. Tune in every Sunday for the highs, the heartache and the heroics that made rugby history. Stream each chapter on SABC Plus anytime, anywhere. No subscription needed. Don't miss Chasing the Sun this Sunday at 7:30 p.m. on SABC2. Be there when history shines.
At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla.
Channel Africa.
And reach out to Africa World Hour through the socials. We are on X, Instagram, TikTok at Channel Africa One, hashtag Africa World Hour. And of course, you can also speak to us via Facebook. Coming up on the program today, we'll tell you about how South Sudan is at a political crossroads as the opposition rejects the call for a dialogue by President Salva Kiir. So that's coming up in this hour. But first, let's tell you about this. The head of the AU on Peace and Security, Ambassador Bankole Adeoye, says all African regions are facing huge security challenges. He was speaking at a joint consultative meeting between the Peace and Security Council and the African Union and the Pan-African Parliament in Johannesburg, South Africa. The meeting seeks to strengthen collaboration between these two institutions. Nhlanhla Mahlangu spoke to him.
The Pan-African Parliament and the African Union's Peace and Security Council commenced a 2-day joint consultative meeting aimed at strengthening collaboration between the two institutions. Themed enhancing institutional synergy and collaboration for sustainable peace and security in Africa, the meeting has brought together key stakeholders from both organs of the African Union to deepen mutual cooperation and operational alignment. The head of the AU Peace and Security, Ambassador Bankole Adeoye, says Africa is facing huge continental geopolitical shifts.
Some of them are beyond our continent. It is necessary to realize that as we address these challenges, we have to be forthright. Great power rivalry is happening in our backyard, unfortunately. External interference has never been higher in many of our conflicts. Our major partners are shifting from support to humanitarian relief to the highest defense spending in history. Our resources are dwindling because partners are shifting there. Indeed, some have said a trade war is brewing because of tariffs and counter tariffs. We cannot simply sit by and watch our continent suffer. In our very own continent, we are facing terrorism, violent extremism. Indeed, many have said that Africa has become, with ignominy, the capital of terrorists globally.
Ambassador Bankole also spoke about the situation in Sudan, where fighting continues to rage between the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese army. He says the continent cannot let the country collapse.
We have come up with political dialogue processes where we've held 3 rounds. We have engaged the civil society, women and youth, recently in Kampala. But all this have not stopped the war. The most significant thing in Sudan, and Mr. President and honorable members of parliament, because the Peace and Security Council know most of the issues. So I will direct my emphasis to you. Raise your voices for the war to stop. It's a senseless, unjustified war. It's a war that was started because of political transition. It has become a tragedy. 12 million people displaced in Sudan. And the history of Sudan is at the center of the African history. We cannot let that country collapse. So I'm appealing to you, raise your voice as members of parliament to join in making sure that Sudan survives. It cannot be balkanized.
President of the Pan-African Parliament, Chief Fortune Charumbira, says it's now more than crucial for the two institutions to work together to tackle challenges faced by the continent.
We have no choice but to ensure that we do work together. Supposed to get together because PAP without the commissions is incomplete. The commissions without PAP are incomplete. That's the architecture of governance. The governance architecture in a state, at national, or even at district level, always compels us that there shall be the executive arm policy and implementation. There shall be the legislative, representative, oversight functions, and there shall be a judicial side of everything. When you operate without the other, you are shortchanging the citizens. And possibly the issue of democratic legitimacy is important. That we may have experts, we may have fundis in any area, but if they work in exclusion of citizens, they are shortchanging the citizens.
The meeting is expected to sharpen the tools of both PEP and the PSC in implementing effective peace and security interventions. Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Tlandla Mahlangu in Johannesburg.
And from Johannesburg to South Sudan now, where we look at the latest political developments there. It seems that the country is once again at a political crossroads. The main opposition party, the SPLM-IO, has rejected President Salva Kiir's latest call for a dialogue, citing arrests of its leaders and ongoing military pressure, with Vice President Riek Machar reportedly under house arrest and the 2018 peace agreement under serious strains. Fears of a return to conflict are growing. Joining us now to speak about these tensions is Professor Jock Majut. Jock, a leading South Sudanese political analyst and professor of anthropology at Syracuse University in the United States, but he speaks to us from Kenya. Professor Jock, a very good evening to you, and good to speak to you on such an occasion.
Very good evening to you, ma'am. Pleased to be back with you.
So just give us your thoughts about where South Sudan is at as we talk about these growing political tensions. Could this have been foreseen?
I think you are right in using the word crossroads. I think that is exactly where the country is at the moment, politically at least. What is happening is that there was this peace agreement in 2018, which brought together the government and opposition movements, including the SPLM-IO. This peace agreement called for a transitional government of national unity, which was established to steer the country towards an exit from these turbulent times. But this was not to be because the parties could not agree on the modalities of the implementation of that agreement. And the result was that the interim period was extended once, it was extended twice. And eventually it culminated in a big breakdown of the peace agreement, including the SPLM-IO leaders being thrown into jail, threatened and fled the country. The chairman of the SPLM-IO, Dr. Riek Machar, somebody who is very familiar to the South Africans and the rest of Africans, is currently under house arrest for months on end. And there is no indication to whether he will be tried in court for the accusations of inciting his military wing, the SPLA-IO, and some paramilitary militias affiliated with him, something called the White Army, to attack an army garrison. South Sudan Defense Forces garrison in a place called Nasser and killed 800 soldiers. This was definitely the final straw that broke the back of the camel when it comes to South Sudan being able to steer its way to peace and stability. So this is where we are today, and a lot of political leaders. There was this initiative sponsored by Kenya called Tumaini, which means hope, which brought together all the whole-out groups that were not part of the 2018 peace agreement. But this one fell apart because the parties could not agree. The government under President Salva Kiir felt that these negotiations were not leading to anything, and simply the parties left. The mediator was disappointed and even offended in that the president was the one who called Kenya to mediate, but then the president did not follow through with some of the agreements, the protocols that were signed. So as we speak, the country is in a state of no war and no peace. Meanwhile, the country is also going down the drain in terms of the economy, which has tanked, in terms of continued violence among communities throughout the country, in terms of instability.
Okay.
With
Professor
regards
Jock,
to the
can I
security
just
of the
stop you
country.
there and say we'll get to the socio-economic ramifications in just a moment, but I just want to zero in on the political processes and the commitments that have been made, which have not been met, which you spoke about. The SPLMIO speaks about President Salva Kiir's appeal as a piece of political theatre, saying he's being disingenuous in this call, given the fact that their leaders are under threat. Some have gone into exile. And the fact that you are in Kenya now, which has played mediator, and I want to talk about IGAD. What are their sentiments about where South Sudan is at the moment, and who do they see as the protagonists for the current situation? Are they pointing a finger at President Salva Kiir?
Yes, the Kenyan mediator, General Samboyo, who was also the architect of the big peace agreement between Sudan and South Sudan in 2005, is definitely frustrated, especially by the position of the government of South Sudan under Salva Kiir, in that this government was the one who called for talks. And then when the talks began to include a lot of things that the government had not planned, including the opposition people calling for overhaul of the security services, calling for major reforms in the way resources are distributed, calling for a constitutional review and dialogue, all these things were not anticipated by Juba. Juba had simply thought that the whole-out groups will be brought here, offered positions in government, and invited to Juba to join the government. Meanwhile, the government will not be able to resolve the socio-economic and political insecurity issues that had brought it to the peace agreement to begin with. And so this one did not fly. The opposition didn't say, the opposition people said that we don't want another power-sharing agreement because this is what we have been doing for a good 20 years, since 2005. Power-sharing agreement is not going to solve the problem of South Sudan. It has to be an overhaul of the political system to streamline possibilities of a transition, political transition. And so where we are at the moment is that the government of Kenya is disappointed in the position of the government. The opposition leaders are saying there is nothing that is going to bring peace except for them, together with the government, sitting down in a constitutional dialogue, an inclusive dialogue, to try to chart out exactly what is the problem of South Sudan, and then secondly, how to solve that problem. And the government says in public that yes, they are interested in such dialogue, but behind closed doors, the government is fighting a war. President Kiir himself keeps saying, I will not take South Sudan back to war, but that is exactly what he's doing. In the wars that have happened recently in Upper Nile, in the dismantling of the SPLA-IO, and in refusal to sit down and discuss the future of this country, including the release of the protagonists. The biggest challenge to President Kiir is Dr. Riek Machar, who is behind bars. So how can the country really chart a way forward in circumstances where the contenders are basically using, hitting below the belt of each other. And so we really do wonder where this country will end up. At the moment, there are no good signs.
You pointed to the socio-economic circumstances as a result of the peace agreement unraveling. You also spoke about the ethnic divide, the Dinka-Nuer tensions, and what we're seeing as the attacks on the Nuer. What are the chances of the peace agreement collapsing so badly that there will be a resurgence of civil war? Or is there anything that regional bodies can do, the AU, IGAD, the United Nations, civic organizations like the CEPO?
Well, I think the essence of this situation is that the government under President Salva Kiir feels that they have won the political battle and that they have also won the military battle and that they are not under any pressure to talk peace with anyone. I mean, this is a very dangerous place to be as a country because that is certainly not the case. If the government fights the Nuer, at least the Nuer who are opposed to it, it's not a winnable war. If the government chooses to think of itself as the winner of these battles and try to forge forward without any dialogue, the country will still be in the rut that it has been for 20 years, at least for 15 years. But with regards to the consequences of that political stalemate, most of which is the fact that communities are still fighting each other along ethnic lines, the fact that the economy has collapsed. There are other factors, including the war in Sudan, which has blocked the flow of oil from South Sudan to Port Sudan on the Red Sea. But most especially is because of the lack of reforms, the level of corruption within the government, the level of intransigence when it comes to human rights abuses. There is certainly no hope that under this current leadership that South Sudan can really prevail.
When I look back at some of the major sticking points, particularly with regards to the more than decades-long peace agreements, between Sudan and South Sudan, and now also in the Sudan, the disarmament program was something that was seen as pivotal in ensuring there is stability. Has that effort continued to fail? And who's to blame for that?
Well, if we were talking about realpolitik, we can say that South Sudan, as a government, as a country, as a people, has the constitutional mandate to assert itself militarily, to monopolize the use of force, to ensure that citizens are disarmed. No citizen is allowed to kill other citizens with impunity. That would be the line that the government uses. The problem is that when disarmament takes place, it becomes a trigger for another round of war, either between communities themselves, because if you disarm one community today and plan to disarm the other one tomorrow, it takes a few hours for the disarmed community to be slaughtered. So concurrent disarmament has been the problem, that the government has not managed to disarm all communities at once so that nobody has an advantage. So then if you say that the government has the right to disarm and to prevent citizens from killing each other, the question is it equitable and just? And the answer is certainly not. But then if you say, what do you do then? What can a government running a country of that kind, what can it do to restore stability and peace? And I think part of the answer to that is dialogue. Because these conflicts may be military, may be strategic, may be political, but at the bottom of all of it is human security. It's the fact that citizens don't feel secure under the protection of the state. And they feel that they have to take the law into their own hands and rely on their ethnic coalitions to protect themselves against other ethnic communities. So unless the government brings together all the various communities and say, what is the problem? It will boil down to the fact that citizens don't feel safe. And when they don't feel safe, they arm themselves to the teeth. So part of the answer to that problem is for the government of South Sudan to seek genuine, credible, and tangible dialogue between communities that are at war with each other, and to communicate between the government and all the opposition leaders, communities, and to say that the government may have the responsibility to protect all, but it doesn't have the right to kill people in the process. There have to be measures that are in place to ensure that disarmament is done in a just way and in a safe way, so that it doesn't become a trigger for the next round of war.
And having said that, Professor Jock, what would you then say about the relevance of the 2018 peace agreement? Is it up to contemporary conditions? What are the major changes that need to be made, if at all?
Well, first of all, South Sudan has reached a space where it can no longer resolve its own problems without intervention from outside. And the legitimate and trusted entities to intervene are the regional powers, including the EAC, the East African Community, including IGAD, including AU, and including individual countries that have shown interest in being mediators, like South Africa, Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, and the rest. And even to bring in some West African leaders, like President Obasanjo, former president of Nigeria, who knows this conflict very well. And so there is a need for that international, regional, and perhaps continental intervention to help South Sudanese really come to the table and have a mediator who is trusted by both. The problem is that many of these parties are far partisan and they are not neutral.
Okay.
They all look at South Sudan from the point of view of what is in it for them, individually as a country, but also in regional terms.
Professor
And I think
Jock,
that is where the problem.
unfortunately, we have run out of time, but always your insights much appreciated and your time as well. Thank you so much for speaking to us about those latest political developments in South Sudan. As he says, it definitely can be described as a political crossroads, as both the opposition and President Salva Kiir failed to see eye to eye on the need for dialogue. That brings the time to 10 minutes to, or rather, 30 minutes to 10. That was Professor Jock Madut Jock, South Sudanese political analyst and professor of anthropology at Syracuse University. He speaks to us from Kenya.
Darubini ya Afrika na I am Henry Shakif.
Hawa wa Afrika Kusini wenye asili ya kizungu ambao wa ukimbizi huko nchini Marekani. Je, nini chanzo cha wao kuomba ukimbizi nchini Marekani?
Wenyewe wajaomba ukimbizi. Kuna shirika fulani inaitwa AfriForum, shirika mbili za wazungu ambao wanatetea haki ya wazungu hapa, AfriForum na Solidarity. Hao walienda Marekani kufanya kampeni kusema kwamba wazungu wananyanyaswa hapa Afrika Kusini. Na walizofanya hiyo kampeni, serikali iweze kuwafuatilia kujua nini ambacho mnasema kwamba mnanyanyaswa.
Kuna namna ya wao kwamba wamepoteza uraia wa Afrika Kusini, na je, endapo Trump akamaliza muda wake madarakani, uhalali wao wa kuishi nchini Marekani ukoje?
Itakuwa vigumu, kifupi itakuwa vigumu wenyewe kupoteza uraia wao.
Darubini ya Afrika 11 kamili hadi 12 kamili majira ya Afrika ya Kati.
1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
And it is 28 minutes to 10. We continue with the African perspective here on Africa World Hour. 60 minutes of the latest news in and around your world, wherever you are, Africa or the world at large. We bring you the latest on that. So in just a moment, we'll be speaking to Operation Tutula about this. It's accused the South African Human Rights Commission of prioritizing undocumented foreign nationals at the expense of South Africans. The Organization says that public facilities, including hospitals and clinics, are experiencing an influx of undocumented foreigners accessing services that, according to them, are meant for citizens. Operation Tutula marched on from Mary Fitzgerald Square in Johannesburg CBD and the Human Rights Commission in Parktown to hand over a memorandum of grievances. Nontsigelelo Mtabela filed this report.
Operation Dudula claims Chapter 9 institutions and the NGOs are violating South Africans' human rights by protecting undocumented foreign nationals. Dudula President Zandile Tabula says government should not gamble with the country's democracy.
All we are saying is that we want South Africans to be prioritized. Clinics, our people must be serviced with dignity and pride. Foreigners must not go there because they must have their own medical insurance when they come to the country. Schools, we're going to launch a campaign end of December, the first week of January 2026. We're going to be stationed at school and no foreign child will be attending a school in a public school. They can rather take them to private, we don't care, but at public schools, it's going to be reserved for South African children only.
The organization believes foreign nationals should pay for medical services.
We strongly believe that South Africa Human Rights Commission should be for South Africans, but we are seeing the opposite. They're prioritizing foreigners over us South Africans. I mean, we just gave them 2 cases as a starting point. That there are cases that have been reported to them by South Africans, but they do not even respond. But when it comes to foreigners, they are quick to respond.
This parent blames undocumented foreign nationals for his son's drug addiction.
As I speak, I don't have a house. I'm renting a house for foreigner from Maputo. But me as a South African woman, I don't have a house. So please, Ramaphosa, you must step down because you like foreigners than your country, than your South African people.
The organization has given the Human Rights Commission 10 days to respond to their grievances. For SABC News, I'm Nomtsigelelo Mtabela in Johannesburg.
Well, we continue with this. We speak now to Kimberly Mutandiro, a journalist with Ground Up. So they've written about these latest occurrences in Johannesburg, South Africa. Immigrant mothers saying that they're being blocked, as you heard, from accessing life-saving vaccines for their children, not by government policy, but by Operation Tutula. So despite a 2023 court ruling affirming the right for free healthcare for all mothers and children in South Africa, regardless of nationality, we are seeing these incidents. And we speak now to Kimberly Mutandiro. Kimberly, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Evening, and thank you for having me.
So I just outlined here the legal constitutional imperatives of understanding South African law, but Operation Tutula, which has been called an anti-immigrant group, which it denies that label, says foreign nationals have no right to health services in South Africa, particularly because they're viewed as at the expense of South Africans. Just give us how this whole saga has been playing out, because it's not just a this year thing or last year. It's been ongoing, these sentiments, for years now in South Africa.
Yes, apparently, I think Operation Tutula somehow, maybe they're in support of their leaders or their organization, as far as an ongoing court cases is actually happening right now. We have actually organizations such as Kopanang Africa Against Xenophobia, and they are being represented by SERI in a court case whereby they're actually challenging some of these actions by Operation Tutula. So I think maybe from my perspective, it's because they are trying to support whatever is going on. They are in opposition of that particular court case, whereby the Social Economic Rights Institute is actually challenging what Operation Tutula has been doing for the past years, going to hospitals in particular, trying to block immigrants from accessing healthcare. And it's really, really apparent that their actions are becoming much more intense because they've been going around clinics in Johannesburg, stopping migrants, pulling them out from the queues, stopping them from accessing healthcare. And the most depressing part of the situation is that mothers who are pregnant, mothers who are bringing their children under the age of 6 are the ones who are actually mostly being affected, considering the fact that there is actually a court ruling that is opposing what Operation Dudula is actually doing. And then it then goes on to question whether or not they are aware of this particular court ruling and whether they actually respect the constitutional right of these mothers and children at all.
And Kimberly, I'm so glad that you raised that part, that it is often pregnant women, mothers and children that are most affected by the denial of access to health services. Has there been any effort by law enforcement in South Africa, in the areas where you've covered these incidents, to actually protect these vulnerable communities?
Well, the most surprising thing is that when we spoke to the Department of Health, they indicated that law enforcement agents are supposed to be present at these particular clinics to stop Operation Dudula, but we did not see any law enforcement agents at all. So it goes on to question whether or not the department itself is even willing to stop Operation Dudula from doing what is actually happening right now.
And I want to point out firstly that you mentioned the Department of Health. They are obviously responsible for dispensing of health services. But then now we're talking about, a policing issue, a state security issue. And we know the conversation right now in South Africa is what a mess that institution is. So I think the most important question is to speak about the South African government as a whole, the architecture thereof. What instruments do they have to support those who are under attack if police officials, security officials are not doing what they're supposed to do? Is the government intending to take Operation Dudula to task through the courts? Has there been any expression of such?
No, actually, there hasn't been any efforts that we have seen by the government itself to try and stop Operation Dudula. And it's as if Operation Dudula is actually getting away with putting the law into their own hands. And yet the government itself, the police, are not doing anything to stop them.
Tell me about how, and also what piqued your interest to start covering these stories. Where have you been? What have you seen?
Well, we receive a lot of emails from immigrants themselves, knowing that at Ground Up we do cover stories on immigration, and they are complaining about these issues that they are being blocked by Operation Dudula. And we've got people who are most vulnerable, who are asylum seekers and refugees, who obviously have the right to access these services in the country. And they're the ones who will reach out to us, telling us of the experiences that they are going through by Operation Dudula. And most of them, because they do not have money, because of the vulnerability of being an asylum seeker, they do not have access to work, they do not have access to any means to survive, so they actually rely on these public healthcare facilities, which they are being blocked. So the more that they write to us, the more that we feel the need to actually get the issues out there, probably to provoke the government itself to do something about what is actually happening, because it is people who are vulnerable who are actually falling victim to what Operation Dudula is doing.
And I want to point to a more nuanced argument here in terms of what the outcome of this will be. So, Seri, which you mentioned earlier on, and for the sake of our listeners, let's tell them what Seri is. That's the Socio-Economic Rights Institute. They say they support Operation Dudula's right to protest, but that protests are misguided. I want to talk about what, and I'm pretty sure these incidents are happening because we've seen it in the past. I mean, I grew up in Vosloorus, so I know where this narrative is going, where you're being accused of being one thing and you're not. So South Africans are probably falling victim to these targeted attacks of so-called foreigners. Have you heard of this? Have you experienced this? And no doubt, and I can lay hand on heart and say this is probably definitely going to happen if it's not happening.
Well, I think there's a lot of scapegoating of foreign nationals. That is what is happening here, because I think they are just groups like Operation Tutula are actually advocating for other South Africans. You wouldn't say that it's every South African who is supporting what Operation Tutula is happening, but they are actually advocating against foreigners, trying to make people believe that foreigners are to blame for the economic conditions that are in the country, and yet that is not the case, really. So you would really say that, it's not everybody who's in support of what Operation Tutula is doing, but it is an organization that is on a mandate, particularly to tarnish the image of immigrants in the country.
But what I'm saying is more pointed that there are probably South Africans who have fallen victim to being accused of being foreign nationals. I mean, even at a certain time in our history, people were being targeted as foreigners and being asked to pronounce certain words in either Sezulu or Sesotho to identify them as foreign nationals. So I'm saying in these cases, there are apparently South Africans who are being denied services, health services, because they're being identified as foreign nationals. Have you come across this? But I am pretty sure, and as I say, I can lay my head on, the guillotine for this. I'm pretty sure that it's happening, because it has happened in the past where people are mistaken as foreigners who actually are South Africans because either they're a little too dark or their accent is not what it should be. I'm a Sotho speaker. Perhaps I can't pronounce certain words in isiZulu or whatever language you're being tested in.
Yes, I've actually heard of such instances whereby maybe somebody did not carry the IDs or something of the sort, and you find that perhaps there's somebody who's vendor who cannot speak isiZulu or who cannot speak isiSotho, and then who ends up being victimized simply because they did not carry their ID. So yeah, there have been some instances where that has happened. And then we've got people also identified as stateless people. You'd find that they are South Africans by birth, probably simply because they were born to South African parents. Then something just happened with the documentation issue, and then they end up just falling under the bracket of being foreign nationals when they are not. So yes, there are so many people who are actually being affected by what Operation Tutula is doing, who are actually citizens and not foreign nationals.
Okay, so this dangerous practice of tribalism or ethnic politics, although Operation Tutula is denying that, they are saying that, they're advocating for the rights of South Africans. Are they themselves seeking legal means of ensuring that South Africans who need to have access to health services actually attain that? Because we also do know that because of the inequality in this country, and some are in very far-flung areas, rural areas, where there is no access to health centers, either because of distance or actually some of those health centers have no medication equipment. Are they advocating for that as well?
Well, I haven't heard of instances where they are actually advocating for any of that. So I wouldn't really say that I've heard of any such thing.
So just in closing, where does the situation rest now? We know the way forward, because Operation Tutula has said that they will continue with their operations. We spoke about Seri, what they're doing. Abahlali basemjondolo, that's also a very interesting angle to it, because they are joining Seri, saying that they are against these anti-foreigner incidents. What are they saying in support of Seri and foreign nationals who are trying to get access to much-needed health services?
Well, in as far as Abahlali Basemjondolo is concerned, they are mostly advocating for illegal evictions, whereby you have people are being evicted illegally by Operation Tutula, because it is stating that foreign nationals should not have access to maybe housing in informal settlements. And then you find that there are some foreign nationals who do live in the informal settlements, and then it is not a case of them being chased away legally, like what the law entails, that they should be provided with alternative accommodation. But there have been instances whereby they have forcefully removed people from the places that they were actually staying. So that is where Abahlali Basemjondolo comes in. But in as far as the healthcare situation, basically it has been Section 27 which has been involved, and then SERI as well, because they are concerned that people are being chased away from hospitals and clinics who are well deserving of healthcare. So I suppose the hope now lies with that court case that SERI has brought forward. We are just hoping that the law rules in SERI's favor and in favor of those people who are affected, that they end up being given access to the services that they are being denied right now by Operation Tutula.
Just a quick and final question. Has there been any death as a result of these operations? Whether it's people, because, you hear stories of women losing their children because of either myriad reasons, whether lack of access to these health facilities, the long distance that they have to travel, women suffering complications, etc., etc. So these operations, have we heard of people, women, children, pregnant mothers being injured, suffering loss, any mortality as a result of these operations, or have we, thankfully not heard of such tragedies?
Thankfully, we haven't heard of any tragedies where people, women actually ended up losing their lives, but there have been cases where some of them have risked lives having to give birth at home because they cannot go to the clinic because of what is happening. I mean, who knows, what is at risk, what is at stake here if this continues to happen.
And indeed, we should know, we should find out. Kimberly, thank you so much for your time, and hope we speak to you again soon. Kimberly Mutandero, journalist with Ground Up, speaking to us about the recent reporting of Operation Tutula, preventing immigrant mothers and their babies from accessing public health care services in defiance of court orders and constitutional rights.
Es-tu préoccupé par quelque chose? Es-tu passionné par les questions qui comptent? As-tu une voix qui mérite d'être entendue? Eh bien, nous avons la plateforme parfaite pour toi. Téléphone-nous ou fais-nous un WhatsApp au +27 66 408 87 42 et nous te rappellerons. Sois dans la conversation.
Salut Channel Africa, ici Beno le diamant rouge et Binal Sport depuis le Cameroun, le pays des lions. Voilà.
Sois dans la conversation. Il ne s'agit pas seulement de parler, mais c'est ta chance d'exprimer ton point de vue, de partager tes opinions et de t'engager avec une communauté qui valorise ton avis. Suivez-nous sur les réseaux sociaux, visitez notre site www.channelafrica.co.za et préparez-vous à partager vos points de vue sur Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Caleidoscópio, o seu programa diário de notícias e análises em língua portuguesa no Canal África. De segunda a sexta-feira, das 20 às 21 horas. Fica a par das notícias mais relevantes da África e do mundo, com uma abordagem especial para os falantes da língua portuguesa. Caleidoscópio oferece-lhes uma análise profunda dos acontecimentos que moldam o continente africano e o panorama internacional. Não perca, acompanhe-nos todos os dias para as notícias e análises essenciais para compreender o que se passa no mundo. Caleidoscópio, informação de qualidade em português com profundidade e rigor. Pode acompanhar-nos através do site www.channelafrica.co.za. Canal África, a perspectiva africana.
Africa World Hour, unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
Well, let's wrap up with this. Developments with the United States quietly deporting a group of rejected foreign nationals to the Kingdom of Eswatini, sparking outrage over legality and secrecy described by the U.S. officials as dangerous criminals. The deportees were sent under a little-known third country arrangement without any known ties to Eswatini. To speak to us about the legal and ethical questions around this, we're joined by Professor Sarah Pauletti, an expert in international law and human rights from the University of Pennsylvania. A very good evening to you, Professor Pauletti. We've seen discussions with the United States, with various countries of, some would say, a dubious human rights records of deporting unwanted, undesirable characters in the United States. Has there been a litmus test around all of these discussions, including in this case on the legalities and constitutionality around this?
So interestingly, the courts have not actually ruled on the legality of these third country removals as they're being carried out. In prior cases, the district courts, the federal district courts have ruled only that they need an injunction. They need to pause the implementation of this policy until they have a chance to rule on it. In some cases, they have ruled that notice must be given to the individuals before they can be deported. And the Supreme Court, in an emergency petition filed by the government, said, well, we can't let that injunction stay. We're going to let the policy move forward, and then we'll debate the merits of what's going on underneath it all later. And so I think there is a real question as to whether or not these removals are legal, what notice is due to individuals as a matter of due process before they're deported under the U.S. Constitution and clearly under international law. Many of these removals implicate the right to non-refoulement and a violation of the country's obligations of non-refoulement and obligations under the Convention Against Torture and other obligations that the U.S. has.
And we know that the United States is not signatory to some of these international protocols and conventions, as you talk about, to do with torture in some cases that cover human rights of people seen as refugees, asylum seekers, etc. And in juxtaposition, the interesting thing is that it has accepted refugees from South Africa. So I'm just wondering how these processes work, particularly in terms of public oversight. There's a South African case, but there's what we're speaking about here, third country deportations.
So in these third country deportations, the Trump administration has been carrying them out with almost zero oversight. In fact, I would say zero oversight, right? The failure to provide notice to individuals, the opportunity to be heard in the courts before they're sent to third countries, the opportunity for any claims of fear of persecution or fear of torture being raised, none of that has happened. And so the most recent deportations, right, they happened overnight. They happened without any notice. And I think people are still trying to figure out exactly who these individuals are. And I think one of the really key things is to know that we cannot take at face value the characterization of these individuals as violent criminals. These are statements that are being made by this administration and by the Department of Homeland Security without any regard for underlying facts and without any presentation of any evidence that the individuals that they're deporting are in fact violent criminals or have any significant criminal history in their background.
Has there been, and by this I mean at least consensus, as in common cause understanding of what would be deemed somebody who's a threat to national security? Over the past couple of decades, there seems to have been some sort of understanding, including with President Trump's first tenure, there would have been some sort of consistency. Have the laws changed so much so that even what you may have done 10 years ago or what you may have said, not necessarily directed at the United States, could be interpreted as such, and therefore you could be described as, has been described in these terms, uniquely barbaric offenders and those who are just terrorists?
The laws have not changed at all. And that's what makes these removals so egregious. The laws have not changed, right? What has changed is the evisceration of any notion of due process and the right to be heard. So there has been no evaluation by a court or by public opinion as to the seriousness or the gravity of the alleged underlying criminal history for these individuals. It absolutely has not been brought before the courts as to whether or not they meet some threshold standard of violence, threat to security. It is simply being declared by edict, and then the deportations are being carried out. And so that is why the legal community and the human rights community and others are so up in arms about what is happening, because there is no basis in law for these current removals.
What about federalism and the role that it plays? Because it seems to me that this is as a result of national edicts, as you say, based on President Donald Trump's own values and principles in terms of his slogan of Make America Great Again. But we've seen tensions with some states where they're not in agreement with the ethos that President Trump is promoting. Have we seen states balk against this national practice?
We've seen states try, right? We have seen states say, we do not want to cooperate. We are not going to cooperate in these mass raids. We are not going to facilitate you running roughshod over our citizens and showing up at courts and intervening in our day-to-day lives. And I will say the states have not taken a very aggressive stance. And in anticipation of the states taking any stance in opposition, the Trump administration has explicitly threatened states that it deems non-cooperative, and municipalities. So most of what is happening in terms of resistance is happening at the local level, not even at the state level. And so it's municipalities, towns, counties, cities that are saying, we don't want ICE interfering with our day-to-day business. We want to be able to carry on the work of our courts, the work of our hospitals, our schools, our churches, without you stepping in and intervening. And those are communities and states and municipalities, cities that are being threatened with funding cuts or other threats. And so the federal government really is operating at full force with very few checks on its exercise of power.
Thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. Professor Sarah Pauletti from the University of Pennsylvania, speaking to us about legal and human rights concerns raised by particularly third country deportation arrangements that are playing out in the United States. This time we're talking about deportations to Eswatini with non-citizens. That brings the time to exactly 10 o'clock. Time's for me to sashay out of here. But before we do that, did you listen to how elegantly I say that? Sashay.
I heard
it's Friday. It's Friday.
Ma'am, it's Friday where?
Tomorrow. We are forward-thinking people.
I love that for you. So on the show, very briefly, if you are looking to step into the realms of an entrepreneur, the entrepreneurship race, if you feel like you're stifled by the competitive nature of the game, or perhaps you just feel like you don't have the skill set, we fix that for you this evening.
And by the way, it's always Friday somewhere. It's the truth. Good Lord's truth. Well, that's how we come to the end of Africa World Hour. It's Shayla and Kumana with the team on Hotlines up next from us. Good night.
Hotlines bring you fresh perspectives